Okay, here we are. Kathy, am I in focus?
I'm not. That's funny because we're both Kathys, and I wasn't sure who you're talking to.
Oh. Well, come on over. No, can you please stand up? Kathy, either one of you. Come over here. Just look in here. Are we in focus?
You are in focus.
Thank you.
Yes, looks good. Your heads, you might want to move it up a little, so not so much of your feet, more your head's showing.
There we go. Stay there, Whitney. There we go.
I think that's good. But you're in focus. Yes.
Thank you. Welcome, everyone. It's, excuse me, Princess Steps Fall 2023, and this is week 9. And the topic is nutrition, and this is Whitney Lundy. She's going to be our awesome guest speaker tonight, and she's done this before, so she knows all of you. She knows your trials and tribulations. And she knows that there's people from one end of the spectrum to another in terms of nutritional needs. But she's got a rock solid, awesome, practical type of conversation in reference to nutrition that we can chew it up and eat it right now today. You can really, no pun intended. And so it's awesome. Also, just a reminder, I told you so. The rain was coming, right? I've been saying it over and over and over. So be prepared. We got some brand new waterproof jackets in today. And so next week also is event prep. So if you haven't already signed up for the Princess Steps 5K, 10K, please feel free to do that. And so here's Whitney.
I'm Whitney. Some of you actually know who I am. There are actually a lot of faces.
I'm sorry, I forgot
know.
something.
Yeah.
It's also girlfriend night. So welcome to the welcome girlfriends. How many are girlfriends? Raise your hands. Okay. Welcome. Okay. Take 2.
Okay. I have been working as a dietitian in the Salem area for about 7 years. The vast majority of my clients actually are recovering from eating disorders, but I do see people for other reasons. I meet with students, families, athletes. Like Susan said, I've been giving this talk now for several years at this point, so it's always a privilege to be here. Tonight, I'm going to talk about why diets are not sustainable for the vast majority of people, what we encourage you to focus on instead. I'm going to give some basic nutrition information primarily around carbohydrate, protein, and fat so that people can feel more confident about why they're actually choosing to eat carbohydrates, proteins, and fats. And then, if you are somebody who's interested in making some changes to how you're eating, I'm going to give you half a dozen or so places where you can start. I do like to start off by reminding people that the pursuit of fitness and the pursuit of health are not the same thing. Eating for weight loss, eating for health are not the same thing. Okay? So why are diets not sustainable for the vast majority of us? It's mostly due to something that we refer to as set point theory. Okay? So at birth, each person has already essentially been programmed with the height that they're going to land at by the time they're in their early 20s, and an approximate weight range for where their body is going to land when they're in their early 20s. That's when human development really does kind of finally stop, is right about the age of like 24-ish. Okay? Now, not every body is designed to end at the same height or in the same weight range, and that is okay. That's totally healthy. Okay? So, we all kind of have that pre-programmed set point weight range, but then when we engage in dieting behaviors or other disordered behaviors, and we either rapidly lose weight or we lose a significant amount of weight, we've got like little survival brain back here that panics. Okay? Historically speaking, when a human body loses weight, it is due to something that is a true threat to survival. Okay? Like war, famine, major illness, major injury. So the human brain and body are actually designed to rally against weight loss to keep us safe. Okay? So we lose a significant amount of weight, brain panics, and what it actually does is recalibrates that set point range just a little bit higher. Okay? And that actually triggers some metabolic shifts in the body as our body now tries to reach that higher, safer weight. Okay? We then perceive it as we've failed the diet, right? We feel like garbage about ourselves, but survival brain back there is going, oh, thank God I saved us. Okay? So then we're looking for the next diet, right? And we engage in that new diet, and we lose weight again, and we start that cycle over. We refer to this as weight cycling, and that actually has several inherent risks with it, okay? So weight cycling is actually associated with increased all-cause mortality. Weight cycling is associated with increased risk of type 2 diabetes, lipid disorders, coronary artery disease. In postmenopausal women specifically, even those of a healthy BMI, weight cycling is associated with an increased risk of sudden cardiac death. Okay? These are reasons that we do not want people engaging in weight loss diets. Okay? Now, the diet industry absolutely capitalizes upon all of this research that we already know. That's why in the United States, the net worth of the diet industry is $72.6 billion. Okay? That is predicated upon the last diet you did failing so that you want the next one. Because if anybody was actually designing a weight loss diet that worked over the long term, it would no longer be a $72.6 billion industry because we would all be fixed. Right?
Like OxyContin.
Right. Yes. Exactly. Yes. So I do want to come back to BMI for a second. I said healthy BMI. BMI is mostly BS. It does not take into account somebody's genetics, does not take into account the size or density of somebody's skeletal structure, does not take into account lean mass versus fat mass, anybody's laboratory markers. Finally, this year, the American Medical Association released a revised position statement on BMI. Okay? And in that statement, they actually said BMI is, quote, an imperfect way to measure body fat in multiple groups, given that it does not account for differences across race, ethnic groups, sexes, genders, and age span, end quote. Okay. Also, BMI was never meant to be used at an individual level, only at a population level. And its original purpose was in mapping the socially ideal human. It had absolutely nothing to do with health. Okay. So, BMI, BS, please don't let anybody hold it against you. Okay, so if we are not advocating for weight loss diets, what are we advocating people focus on? What does healthy eating actually look like? We are really trying to get people back to the basics, okay? Thanks to the internet, thanks to social media, influencers, yada, yada. People have really kind of gotten lost in the weeds of all of the sensationalism around nutrition, right? We really want to bring people back to the basics. So what we encourage, we want to see people prioritizing water, fruits and vegetables, beans, peas, lentils, whole grains, healthy fats like avocado, nuts, seeds, fatty fish, tofu, dairy, okay? We want to see people emphasizing lean proteins. That can be from plant-based sources, can also come from things like, again, some dairy, fish, seafood, lean poultry, etc. Okay? And then we want to see people limiting fast food, restaurant food, fatty animal products, processed animal products, those refined grains and other processed packaged foods, sugar-sweetened beverages, and alcohol. This is truly like the low-hanging fruit. This is going to be biggest bang for your buck, where if you can come back to these basics and really nail these down, you will absolutely see improvements in how you are feeling within your body. Okay? Now, we absolutely do need carbohydrate. We absolutely do need protein, and we absolutely do need fat. And we need them in a much tighter ratio than the vast majority of fad diets are promoting. Okay? So I'm going to take a minute here. I'm going to walk you through why these are all so essential, why I don't want anybody actually being afraid of any of these. Okay. Real quick, show of hands, who remembers back in the 90s, the whole like fat is evil craze, right? Anti-fat, reduced fat, light, right? Anybody remember the Olean potato chips? Now, lo and behold, wait a minute, fat is good for us, right? It's something that we need, okay? This is the exact same thing that we are seeing happen with carbohydrates, okay? Carbohydrates are not evil. You absolutely need them, okay? It comes down to nuance in this conversation, okay? When we're talking about carbohydrates in terms of nutrition, we're really looking at like refined carbohydrates and complex carbohydrates, okay? It is the refined carbohydrates that we are encouraging people to limit, okay? Some examples of those refined carbohydrates are going to be things like flour tortillas, chips, crackers, cookies, pastries, other sweets, a lot of our frozen foods, boxed pasta dishes, a lot of our bread products, not all of them, okay? These are all examples of items that have refined carbohydrates in them. The reason we want people to be limiting these is because those refined carbohydrates actually digest very, very quickly, okay? So everything kind of empties the stomach at one time, and that glucose coming from the carbohydrates kind of hits your system at one time, and we get a spike in our blood sugar that's higher than we would typically like to see, okay? So then the body releases insulin to correct for that, and so we kind of get a big spike followed by a drop. And the more frequently over time we're getting these larger spikes and drops, then what happens is that's when we start to see kind of the more rapid progression of insulin resistance and the development of type 2 diabetes. Okay? So if instead we're going to choose complex carbohydrates, it's actually going to help to minimize those more extreme spikes and drops. Okay? The other reason we encourage people to limit the refined carbohydrates, again, they process very quickly. They're also not super satisfying in terms of their volume, right? There's not a whole lot of substance to them. So typically, we end up eating a larger volume of those foods before we feel satisfied. And over time, that can lead to us consuming more than we really kind of needed and can contribute to kind of that increased weight gain that we just don't really want to see. Okay? Complex carbohydrates, on the other hand, we want people eating more of. The reason for this primarily comes down to the fiber content of those complex carbohydrates. Okay? Fiber is absolutely essential for optimal, improved health over the long term. Okay? We can only get fiber from our plants, and our plants are our sources of carbohydrate. Okay? So with fiber, it takes longer for the stomach to digest any fibrous food, okay? So what happens is we have smaller boluses of food, digested food, that release into the intestines at a time. So we get a lower and slower rise in our blood sugar levels, okay? So then the body doesn't need to respond quite so severely in terms of the amount of insulin being released, okay? So that helps to help maintain not only blood sugar control, but insulin sensitivity. These are two very wonderful things. Fiber also helps to increase satiety, okay? So we tend to feel fuller a little bit faster, and it keeps us feeling fuller for a slightly longer period of time. Fiber also helps to reduce the inflammatory response within the body, and it actually helps to minimize our risk of developing cardiac disease. Okay? So, and we also actually think that it helps to prevent the development of colon cancer, and it certainly helps with bowel regularity. So this is the nuance that's not really being talked about when it comes down to that carbohydrate conversation. Okay? Some examples of these complex carbohydrates. It's going to be things like quinoa, popcorn, obviously not super heavily buttered, but popcorn, rice, 100% whole grains. Listed out several of them here. Oh, potatoes, sweet potatoes. These are all examples of those complex carbohydrates. Okay, they're starchier molecules, but they've got the protein and the fiber there, packed with vitamins and minerals too. They're great. Okay. You need carbohydrate not just for fiber, but carbohydrate is what breaks down most easily into glucose. Glucose is what fuels your brain and your body. Okay. Yes, the body can convert protein and fat that we eat into glucose, but it is not actually very efficient for the body. And if we're going to make the body use the protein and fat we're eating as the glucose source, then the protein and fat is not available to do all of their essential functions that carbohydrates cannot do. Okay? So glucose is what our body runs on. We access glucose most efficiently from carbohydrates. What's going to be best interest for health is making sure you're eating fiber-rich carbohydrates throughout the day. Okay? Proteins. All three of our macronutrients, they are essential. Proteins are also essential. Proteins break down into their little component amino acids. Okay? Those get shuttled throughout the body, and they are used in a variety of things. We have a countless number of chemical reactions that are occurring within our body every 24-hour period. Almost every single one of those chemical reactions is enzyme-driven, and amino acids are those enzymes. Right? So that's one essential function of that protein. But it's also critical for tissue maintenance and repair, storage and transport of various molecules like iron and oxygen. Proteins are also used in antibody formation and in the production and regulation of hormones. So protein also serves very essential functions, but they're very different from the functions that carbohydrates serve. Fat is also absolutely critical for long-term health. Okay? When a fat is digested, they're kind of a funky little molecule. It looks like a funky E. We have what's called a glycerol backbone and 3 little fatty acid side chains. During digestion, this little glycerol backbone, it gets cleaved off, and it gets converted into glucose for a tiny bit of energy. But these fatty acids get shuttled throughout the body, and they are all used in a variety of things, like blood clotting, central nervous system regulation, production and regulation of sex hormones specifically, absorption of our fat-soluble vitamins A, D, E, K. Unsaturated fatty acids, they are anti-inflammatory, and they seem to improve our cholesterol levels. Okay? So again, absolutely essential functions that are unique to fats that protein and carbohydrate cannot do. Okay? So this is why we're really advocating for people to be getting a good variety of all 3 macronutrients throughout the day. So where do fruits and vegetables fit into all of this? Our plants are fantastic sources of antioxidants. They contain what are called phytonutrients. Okay? These actually help within the body to prevent and mitigate disease. So they do improve our overall health over the long term. Okay? Research does show that the greater the abundance of and greater the variety of produce consumed over the course of a week, over the long term, better health outcomes. So these are the reasons that we advocate for fruits and vegetables. We're not advocating for them as a weight loss hack. We're not doing the whole volumetrics thing. Please just make sure you're eating an abundance of fruits and veggies because they actually do benefit your body. It's not related to weight. Okay? So if you feel like you want to make some changes to how you're currently eating, please do not try to do a massive overhaul all at one time. Okay? Because it will not be sustainable. Instead, what we recommend is pick 1 or 2 small things that you can work on initially, and then just let it build from there as you get comfortable incorporating each little change that you've decided to focus on. Okay? If you're really kind of starting from the ground up, what I encourage people to do, if this is not triggering for you, I am going to absolutely make that statement here. Please don't do this if this is going to be triggering. But if it's not, what I encourage somebody to do is 5 to 7 days, just make note of what you eat and drink and when. We're not measuring, we're not weighing, we're not tracking, we're not counting anything. All you are doing is writing down the what and the when. Okay? Do that for 5 to 7 days, and then you're going to sit down with like some highlighters or some pens. You're going to look at things like, how often did you eat out or order in? How often were you selecting fried foods or heavily sauced foods or other similarly heavy foods? How often were you finishing a meal feeling overly full or still unsatisfied? What did your carbohydrate intake actually look like through the day? And this one I am really hammering on because we're seeing this more and more. We have more and more people coming to us feeling like they cannot be trusted with carbohydrate foods, people who are complaining about binging on carbohydrates. And what we're usually seeing is people will limit those carbs all day long, and then they get to those evening hours and they feel like they binge on them. Or they'll do really, really well avoiding carbohydrates for several days at a time, and then have a period of 1 or 2 days where they feel like they're binging on carbohydrate. The solution for that is we're actually going to take those carbs and we're going to redistribute them throughout the day so your brain's not getting all panicky around them. Okay, so that's one reason we want people paying attention to that pattern. Okay. So these are some of the places that you can start. If you do not want to do that method, some other things that you can do. First and foremost, please bring carbohydrates back into your day. You have choices about the type. Okay? You absolutely have choices about the type, but a scarcity mindset is a scarcity mindset. It does not matter. You can have an abundance of food in your house, but if you are limiting something very specific, your brain is absolutely going to enter that scarcity mindset. You're going to have trouble not thinking about it. You're going to have trouble controlling yourself with portioning when you finally do let yourself have it. Okay, that is due to scarcity mindset. We really want to avoid that as much as possible. Okay. Something else that you can do is, as often as possible, please make sure that you are eating when you are hungry. Okay. So this can certainly feel like a growling stomach, but it can also feel like irritability, brain fog, trouble focusing, just kind of an empty sensation, and also your thoughts increasingly turning to food. We require air, water, and food for survival, and so your brain is hardwired to turn your thoughts to those things increasingly if we're not getting one of them in sufficient supply. So if you are trying to do work and somebody comes up behind you and they cover your nose and mouth with their hand, you can keep trying to work. Pretty quickly, the only thing you're going to be able to think about is your need for air, right? No one questions that. Same thing goes with a thirst, right? We can be sitting there working until we reach that point where we're like, I have to get something to drink right now. I cannot stand this. Nobody questions it. But if we're sitting there working and our thoughts keep turning to food, so many people go, what is wrong with me? Why am I so obsessed with food? And it's because you need food. So please, as soon as possible, go get yourself some food so that your brain can then give its attention back to something else. Okay? That truly is one of our earliest hunger cues, is our thoughts just increasingly turning to food. Okay? I have just a few more here for you guys. Please stop telling yourself that you can't have something, you shouldn't have something. Again, all that does is reinforce a scarcity mindset, okay? And it does make it very challenging to then have control with some of these higher value foods in the moment. And then people end up in my office saying, I can't be trusted with this food, I can't stop binging on this food. And I hate it when that happens, because really the big issue is that we feel like garbage about ourselves when that's the pattern and we can't seem to come out of it, okay? So for anybody who does feel like they have a tendency to binge on a specific food or two, what we actually do is I ask you to purchase that food, and you're going to have a little bit of it with every single meal. Okay, so I always use the Oreo example, never calling anybody out with it, it's just a really common one. Okay, I have a lot of people in my office who do frequently binge on Oreos, and so what we will do is I have them put an Oreo on their plate at breakfast, lunch, and dinner. I know it sounds crazy. However, please do so. People always ask, well, then what? I'm going to binge on them. What happens when they're suddenly gone? And I say, as soon as you are able to, please go buy another package. And then continue doing this. Okay? What we have to do is get the brain to trust that that food being available is not conditional upon you being good or bad. Okay? You really need to get your brain to a place where it can trust that that food is just going to be there whenever you want it. As soon as the brain starts to calm down around that specific food, you're in complete control. And you can actually sit down and very calmly enjoy however many of these things you actually want to be eating. Okay? So please, as much as you can, get out of the mindset of, I can't have this, I shouldn't have this. Okay? If you often feel full, too full, after a meal, usually we're seeing this at dinner. It can certainly happen at other meals as well. But if you're somebody who just kind of feels like you struggle with over fullness, what you can do, first, if it seems to always be happening at dinner, please consider bringing in more food during the first part of your day. Okay? Or have a snack on your way home from work or right at the end of your workday. Okay? It's not going to totally destroy your appetite for dinner, but it is going to put you in a calmer mindset when you sit down to your meal. Okay? And you're more likely to eat an amount of food that feels comfortable. Okay? Now, let's pretend that you feel like you've eaten sufficiently all day long, but you feel like you still have a tendency to overeat at specific meals. The way we can handle this is, go ahead and dish yourself up however you normally would, and then you're going to take about 1/3 of what's on your plate, and you're going to set it aside on a different plate. You're going to leave it in the kitchen. Sit down, enjoy what is on your plate, but please make sure that you are saying to yourself, I get to go back and get that food as soon as I want it. Okay? We have to have that particular mindset where it's like, nope, I am going back for this. I'm not limiting myself to this. I'm just getting myself used to seeing a smaller amount of food on my plate. Okay? That is truly how we retrain the brain to adjust to smaller portions without entering that scarcity mindset and just making the problem worse. Okay? Please turn off screens. This is a big one. Please turn off screens, my dear darling daughter, when you are eating. Here is why. For full mealtime satiety, our brain really wants to be engaged in this multisensory experience, right? We have all of these senses, right? The brain really wants to be engaged. As soon as we have a screen in front of us, that is what gets our attention, right? This is what the brain is now focused on. It's really not focusing on the scents and tastes, flavors, textures of that meal. It's focused on the screen. So then what happens is we'll finish eating our food, we're physically full, but then the brain checks back in and is like, hold up a second, I didn't get to participate. I want something to eat too. And then we find ourselves in the kitchen food seeking even though we're full. And it's because the brain did not get to join in the experience sufficiently. Okay? So the other thing is, you know what? We invest a lot of money these days, time, effort into the food that we're putting in front of us. That food really deserves our attention. And if we're going to make the choice to sit down and eat food, we absolutely deserve to be present and enjoying that experience. Okay? My last couple things here. Please keep in mind that nutrition recommendations are always assuming perfect world scenario. And most of us are not living that perfect world scenario. I don't know about any of you, but I know that I do not have unlimited finances. I do not have a personal shopper. I don't have a personal chef. I don't have a personal trainer, a nanny, housekeeping staff, right? I'm doing it all on my own, just like I imagine all of you are too. And what that means is we're not going to be able to eat 7 to 10 servings of produce a day because that's ridiculous, right? So instead, please consider with your life as it is right now, what can you do? What are you capable of? And start there. Please don't get caught up in guilt and shame of, oh, well, I can't meet those recommendations. It's fine. None of us can, even the professionals. Okay, so just do the best you can. My final thing, please, 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 as much as you can, tune out the noise. You all know your bodies better than anybody else can. You actually know how to feed your bodies better than anybody else is going to be able to tell you to feed your body. Okay? So if you are hearing a recommendation and it just doesn't sit right with you because you know that maybe that doesn't feel good in your body, or somebody's telling you you shouldn't eat something and you're like, God, if I think about it, I feel fine when I eat that. Please listen to that. Please listen to that. Okay? Because again, nobody knows your body like you know your bodies. Thank you.
She just gets better and better and better every time.
I know.
Thank you so much. I just love it. I just love it. You're welcome. Thank you. Isn't that stuff you can just chew it up and eat it right now? That's information you can use right now. Come on back.
I feel okay.
We have time for just one or two questions. Anybody? Couple questions? I know you're all hankering to get out there.
I had a question to start when you're talking about like going to survival mode when you're losing weight. Isn't that only if you lose like a substantial amount of weight?
Let's repeat the question.
That's a
just in case.
fantastic question. So the question is, this like going into survival mode, doesn't that only happen when we lose like a substantial amount of weight or we kind of pass a particular threshold? Yes, kind of, sort of. So to clarify on that, we kind of have like this little survival part of our brain. So it's really, some people will call it like lizard brain, okay? And that part of the brain is responsible for those most vital, essential functions. So when I'm talking about kind of like survival brain, I'm actually talking about that part of the brain versus like a survival mode in terms of metabolism, if that makes sense. So kind of survival brain back there is really paying attention to the conditions within the body, and it's always kind of responsible for driving like those hunger and satiety cues. It's also like sleep functions, all of that kind of stuff. So that's what I'm referring to. I do appreciate the clarification there. That the idea of like survival mode with metabolism, we do know, and this word is starting to get a lot of flack because it's oversimplified. But what we do know is when we are dropping our caloric intake too far, our bodies are incredibly adaptive, okay? They are incredibly resilient. We are hardwired for survival. So one of the things that happens is the brain can actually begin to kind of throw certain systems almost into power state, okay? So like for a lot of my people who are way malnourished, their digestive tracts actually run at a much slower than normal rate because the body's trying to conserve energy, okay? So the body does make metabolic shifts to keep this person safe and stable as long as possible. So that's more kind of like this idea of survival mode. But what I was referring to earlier is really kind of that lizard brain, that survival brain.
Yes. So you activate the lizard brain. Are you always susceptible then? I mean, is it something you go into remission from that once you change your attitude?
So this little part of your brain is always active. It's always active. It's always just kind of assessing environment, assessing situations, right, and responding to that, sending messages throughout the body. So there's no part that has to like get activated or anything. It's that part of the brain is just doing its job. And so it's like if you haven't had enough sleep, that survival brain, lizard brain back there is going to be like, no, you're sleeping, right? If we're not eating enough food, that's one of the things that's really driving those hunger cues, trying to tell us you need to eat, you need to eat. So it's a part of the brain that's always functioning.
I guess to clarify, so if you make it go into panic and raise the ante on how many calories your body needs or the rate of your metabolism, and can you reverse that?
That's a fantastic question. To some degree, kind of, sort of.
I got it. It's gray zone.
It is a gray zone. This is something that this is still emerging research. It depends upon how long it's been. It depends upon what a person's like weight history looks like. So the more severe that weight cycling history, the more severe the dieting history, the eating disorder history, the less we can really count on being able to pinpoint where a person's body might comfortably land once we finally get them out of those behaviors. And it usually takes at least a couple years for us to kind of see where someone's going to settle out. But the longer and the more extreme the behaviors, the more difficult it becomes to predict. Yeah.
That's awesome. Thank you again, Whitney. And thank you, everyone. And girlfriends, I hope you have a great time out there. I'm going to sign off here and then release you. And I just want to say that I'm just going to keep exercising all the time because I love good food. And that'll at least make me feel good.
Better?
Yeah, better.